And because this is one of those days that ends in a Y, we are also following another breaking story tonight out of the Justice Department. So you have Brian Williams, you got Nicole Wallace, you got Rachel Maddow now joining our conversation, and you get to explain this one.
Today is another one of those split-screen days in American history, one of those days that you will tell your kids and your grandkids what you were doing when this unspooled. I mean, we've got this crucial primary unfolding in real time right before our very eyes, while simultaneously a rule of law crisis, what some people are calling a rule of law emergency, is unfolding in the incumbent administration. All four veteran prosecutors who had been handling the Roger Stone case today resigning one after the other in a story that has unspooled dramatically over the course of the day. The resignations coming, of course, after the Justice Department at the highest levels intervened to overturn the prosecutor's recommendation for a serious 7 to 9 year long prison term for the president's longtime friend, Roger Stone, following public tweets by the president in which that recommended sentence was criticized in harsh tones by the president last night. The Stone case is being handled out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. 1 week ago, Attorney General Bill Barr installed his close longtime aide as the U.S. Attorney in that office, replacing the former U.S. Attorney whose name was Jesse Liu. Amid uncertainty about Liu's role in this current scandal and a lot of uncertainty about her ouster at the Justice Department, tonight Axios was first to report that Liu's nomination to another Trump administration job has tonight suddenly been yanked. Now, in order to get confirmed in that job, Jesse Liu was scheduled for a confirmation hearing in the United States Senate the day after tomorrow. With all of this scandal coming out of the office that she appears to have just been ousted from, the prospect of her testifying in an open hearing in the Senate in 2 days may have been too much for the White House to not try to stop. It is hard to see how all of these dots, the president's friendship with Roger Stone, his criticism of the recommended sentence for Stone, the newly minted U.S. attorney hand-chosen by Attorney General Barr, now this radical move in the Stone case, the cascading resignations of career prosecutors apparently in protest of that move. It's hard to not see it as connected. The former chief of counterintelligence at the Justice Department, David Laufman, is one of the people who has been sounding the alarm in the loudest possible terms about this crisis today. David Laufman saying online today, quote, "We are now truly at a break glass in case of fire moment for the Justice Department."
Nicole Wallace, we're under a half minute.
When she puts it like that, listen, no, look, that's exactly right. It's the right way to put it. I spoke to two former Justice Department officials, both of whom served in the time of Trump before I came on the air, who described it not in dissimilar terms. And these are not people prone to panic or hysteria. They're the kind of people who appreciate individuals like these four career prosecutors who stayed to protect the department. And I think there are two parts of this story where it gets a lot more dire, even from this moment. One, if you rewind the tape, why did Jesse Liu leave? So here are the cases that are in that office. And I think most people understand because we've sort of all gone to law school, but there are a lot of sensitive cases there. The Flynn case is there. Andy McCabe's prosecution was there. And, you know,
Roger
the Stone
case
was there.
Yeah.
So it makes a whole lot of sense. You talked about connecting the dots. They're direct lines at this point.
It's one of two stories we're covering tonight. Here's the other. It's 8 o'clock Eastern time, and the decision desk is allowing us to say about the New Hampshire primary at this hour, Sanders leads in a race that is too early to call. It can only mean one thing for us. Over to that board and our man, Steve Kornacki. Steve.
All right, here we go. As you mentioned, about 14%, so early, but it is about a 2,500 vote advantage that Sanders has over Buttigieg here. Translates to 6 percentage points. Again, 8 p.m. means we are waiting on about 20% of the state. In terms of 20% in terms of turnout, we think will come from the places, the cities and towns that are closing right now. That includes Nashua, second largest city in the state. Oh, look at this. They close. Okay, this is Salem. This was actually a 7 p.m. closing, but this just came in. Salem is a town. You shop if you're from Massachusetts in tax-free Salem, New Hampshire. This is a bedroom community here. Rockingham Park used to be here. Pete Buttigieg has won this one. Take a look here in 2016. This is notable because, again, I say Sanders won basically every city and town in New Hampshire in 2016. So to only have won by 7 in 2016 said he's going to be in a little bit of trouble in Salem tonight. He did not carry it. Pete Buttigieg carried it. This is a bedroom community, essentially, just on the other side of the Massachusetts border. Klobuchar right here with 18%. Again, this is good news for Pete Buttigieg to win it. But I think one of the questions that's being raised here as these numbers start to accumulate is, did Klobuchar rising here clearly at the end and getting to 18% in this particular town? I think Buttigieg would like to be beating Sanders by more here. This is a place demographically favorable to the non-Sanders candidates. And I think when you have an opportunity like this on this map, you maybe want to be beating him by more than 4 points to offset what he's been able to do in some other places. So it's good news for Buttigieg to win Salem, but perhaps he wanted to win Salem by a little bit more. Take a look here again, statewide, what we're looking at, just doing the math here, 2,504 votes separating them, 14% in. We are waiting. I thought Salem at first was one of those 8 p.m. closings. It's to 7 p.m. So again, we're waiting on those 8 p.m. closings around Nashua. Again, those are a lot of those places that are closing right now are like Salem. Demographically, you would say they are probably favorable to the non-Sanders candidates. So let's take a look what we just saw in Salem. Let's take a look if that replicates itself in these other places. And just taking a quick look while I'm here, Manchester is still at the same place in terms of returns, Canterbury North and Concord at 50%.
Steve, don't move a muscle. I'm coming right back to you, but I wanted to pass this along to our viewers. NBC News confirming that Andrew Yang will tonight suspend his campaign. This is an announcement that came out right at poll closings. You see he is in the right-hand list. He is just north of write-ins after a long time in the race, after establishing the Yang Gang that would go anywhere, do anything for their candidate, and after, of all things, running on the beauty of math, unable to crack what is an early number of 3%. There are his supporters waiting for what will be a solemn appearance, I am guessing, at campaign headquarters tonight. Yang suspending his effort. Steve, did you just get numbers while I've been yammering?
Oh, I talk too loud in here sometimes.
No.
What we have that we can show you is it's the updated exit poll. I just want to kind of close the loop on this because we said when we first got the exit polls, they would be updated. So we've got a better sense of the electorate right now with an updated exit poll. And I think one thing that jumps out at this number of 18 to 29-year-olds in this New Hampshire electorate tonight sits at 12%. Remember, in the first wave of the exit polling, it was 11. In 2016, it was 19. And one of the questions was, when we got subsequent waves of exit polling, was that 11 going to move way up close to 19? Obviously, when you look at these splits on age, that's probably going to favor Sanders if it does. It's only moved from 11 to 12, though. And again, we've got a lot more of that exit poll filled out now. The 65 plus has come down to 27. It was at 33 earlier. But again, not as much of an 18 to 29-year-old electorate, certainly as you saw in Iowa. Doesn't look like it's moving up dramatically towards that 19. And yet, Sanders still leads this thing statewide right now. I'm just looking to see if we've got any more vote in while I've been talking, see if we can update that at all. Still where we were when I stopped. But again, they're about 2,501. That's the lead for Sanders right now. I just say one of the things we're seeing in this exit poll, I don't think I have the graphic yet, is generally Sanders just kills it among the youngest voters, 18 to 29 that we're just talking about. Generally, he is an afterthought among 65 plus. You're very much seeing that dynamic. Sanders doing way better with younger, way worse with older. He's got, I would say, looking at these results, a little bit more of a pulse, a little bit more than we're used to seeing with the older side of voters here. So that might be helping him a little bit here in New Hampshire. And you can see just a little more vote coming in right there. Again, a little less than 2,500 separating them. We're going to take a look here, see where that came from.
Okay, Steve, we'll get you oxygen and nourishment. Quickly introduce our house guests here. Everyone is here with us. Rachel Maddow, Nicole Wallace, Senator Claire McCaskill, Jason Johnson. And let's not forget Manchester, our kind of portable NBC News election bureau. Every 4 years in Manchester, the two Chris's, Matthews and Hayes, holding down the fort. Quickly to you, gentlemen, just what do you make of what you've seen with the knowledge that we might have to go back to Steve Kornacki at any moment?
I mean, the thing that strike me when we look at that board, that big board with Steve Kornacki, is that Joe Biden is physically not on the board.
Right.
His head is cut in half at the bottom of that. And I mean, I got to say, I think it's hard. Even as early as October or November, if you go back and say he's going to maybe finish 4th or 5th in New Hampshire, everything about this race for the last year has been shaped by Joe Biden's presence in it. It shaped who was able to stay in the race and who wasn't, including Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, who was able to get a real look and who wasn't, including Steve Bullock and Michael Bennet. All of the space taken up by Joe Biden, and we are now in the second contest that we're looking at, and he came in 4th in Iowa and is looking not very strong tonight.
Okay, let's go through the list of people who didn't run because Biden did. Ready?
Yeah.
You're first.
Terry McAuliffe is one.
Probably John Kerry.
John Kerry, maybe, yeah.
Probably Sherrod Brown.
Yep.
So that leaves that moderate wing, that moderate lane, we've been calling it, the AFC, I've been calling it. To win a Super Bowl, you got to get into at least one of the conferences. You got to win. And now tonight it looks like there is a battle for that lane. It's between Klobuchar and Buttigieg, based upon her performance Friday night.
But again, that is true, I think. But they don't have a ground game in Nevada, as far as I can tell. Not much of one.
Klobuchar doesn't.
No. They're going to. There's a fundraising issue. There's a capacity issue. I mean, and again, that would be totally different, but for the fact that Joe Biden has been occupying that space in this campaign. We've got this completely upside-down world that we have now entered into.
And I go to that question you just got to, which is the question of where do you go from here? And Klobuchar, where do you go now? It's like Paul Tsongas coming out of here when he beat Bill Clinton here in '92. Where did he go? He didn't have a team anywhere else.
Right. That's
So
the
we
thing.
agree. And so
you got to
we
have a
had-
national
and we had-
organization. You got to have a national organization. Joe Biden's already up in South Carolina. Bloomberg and Steyer have the airways crowded with their ads. So they've got a tough organizational task ahead of them that Bernie Sanders does not, because he's up. He's got organization in all those states.
And Biden is now gone to basically the island off of China, where he thinks he can hold on against the mainland.
Well, he's down in South Carolina tonight. And again, I just want to say, I think the argument the Biden people make about the way this calendar works is correct.
Yeah.
That in the year 2020, Democratic Party is a diverse coalition, and to have these two states essentially have a veto.
Let me give a more positive view of the Biden campaign. Bernie has his Bernie people have been with him for all these years. 4 years they've been with him. And 25% hardcore, hard to move. Elizabeth Warren learned that. She couldn't move them away. She tried to imitate his policies, agenda, couldn't do it. Can Biden come back if he holds a huge chunk of the African-American vote? He's up to 60%. They are 60% of the vote down in South Carolina. Can he build that core back up the way that Bernie Sanders has built his core?
I just don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't know.
I'm going with maybe, Brian.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. At the start of our coverage, I warned our viewers we were going to have to cover more than one story, walk and chew gum tonight. This was a consequential day where the rule of law is concerned. That has not changed. Steve Kornacki, however, has new numbers in this other story we are covering tonight. Oh, by the way, the New Hampshire primary results. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Brian. Yeah, here you go. 15% in statewide against Sanders, continuing to lead by 2,500. It's a 5% margin over Pete Buttigieg. One important thing here that just happened, our decision desk monitoring these results. This is, in addition to seeing who has the most popular strength, it is a battle for delegates. There are 24 delegates that are up for grabs here in New Hampshire tonight. And our decision desk is now confident. Remember, to get delegates, you got to hit 15%. And there's 3 jurisdictions you can do it in. You can do it in the 1st Congressional District of New Hampshire, the 2nd Congressional District, or you can do it statewide. Our decision desk is now confident, looking at the returns and looking at the support Sanders has, that he will hit the threshold statewide and in CD1 and in CD2. And so as a result, he will have, according to our decision desk, at least 6 of New Hampshire's 24 pledged delegates that are up for grabs right now. Again, Sanders' strength right now, you've been seeing in these returns, running 5-6 points ahead of his nearest competitors. He'll get at least 15%. That's what it means to see him getting projected delegates right now. There are still 18 more up for grabs. Obviously, we've been saying we're waiting for this 8 p.m. vote to come in here. We're waiting for some big college towns like Hanover and Durham to come in. Here's an example of what a college town can do to change the mix a little bit. Take a look at what just came in. This is New London, New Hampshire. This is the home of Colby Sawyer College. What do you see here? You see Bernie Sanders in 3rd place. You see him down double digits. We said demographically places with a lot of college degrees, perhaps a little higher income. These are places that might be ripe for a Buttigieg or for a Klobuchar. And that's what you're seeing right here in New London. Buttigieg, Klobuchar combining for nearly 60%. Sanders stuck at 17%. But again, I've said this in a few other places tonight. Those spots where Sanders is most vulnerable demographically. If you're Buttigieg or if you're Klobuchar, you maybe want to be beating him by more. If you're Klobuchar, you want a chunk of what Buttigieg got. If you're Buttigieg, you want a chunk of what Klobuchar got, so you can build some more distance in those places from Sanders. Because again, right now, they are chasing him statewide. It's a margin now of almost 2,800 with 17% in.
All right, David Plouffe, who knows his way around New Hampshire. Bad day for the rule of law. We've established that much. Good night for who?
Well, Bernie Sanders, if he wins, obviously, I think he would have been able to survive a loss, but it looks like if that holds. And I think Mayor Pete and Amy come out of here with some momentum, for sure. I think we're going to have to look at turnout. I'm probably most interested in that as it relates to the general election. Mm-hmm. Do we like what we see there vis-a-vis Iowa? But again, I think Steve was talking about the national organization. I mean, the acceleration of this race is hard to capture, from this point on, really, because going out of New Hampshire, people aren't just going to be bunkering in Nevada and South Carolina. They're going to go to the Super Tuesday states. Yeah. And so who's got the ability? Now, so you look at those numbers. You got, as Steve just said, boy, maybe if Klobuchar hadn't had her surge, Mayor Pete would have won. But Bloomberg's going to enter the party. Biden and Warren might have some states where they're strong. So the sort of non-Sanders vote gets chewed up 4 or 5 ways. And so I think that's what we have to watch heading into Nevada and South Carolina. Does that settle it all? But Bernie has, if this holds, he has the balloons come down, gets to say he won the first vote, and gets to go on. And I think for Mayor Pete to go, well, 1-2, I guess, 1 in Iowa, 2 in New Hampshire. Who would have thought that even 60 days ago? So I think the question now is
16 days ago.
16 days ago.
The Pete story is a brand new story. And I think, to me, it reminds me so much, and this is my own PTSD, but it reminds me so much of the Republican primary in 16, where there was Trump, and he had his people, and they loved him, and they weren't going to leave him no matter what. But then the alternative to Trump was split up among Rubio and Jeb and
16 different candidates who were all the anti-Trump versus him.
And so I guess I just wonder, David Plouffe, what the sort of dividing lines are for those not Bernie campaigns.
This is such an important point, Nicole, because now the Republican rules are winner take all. But Trump didn't get north of 40% reliably till deep in the calendar. And if somebody had emerged as his main alternative, there might have been a chance to deny him or make it a lot closer. And so what's interesting when you look at it, it's a great night for Amy Klobuchar. Again, 5 days ago, who saw this coming?
Right.
But you look at who's got the most differentiation of the non-Sanders vote. Now, Bloomberg's got the pocketbook, but Mayor Pete's the young, fresh face. So you think he's got probably an ability, perhaps, if he can continue to catch lightning in a bottle, to be the person who becomes that stand-in. But boy, can he put it together in Nevada, South Carolina? He's 1-2. Right now, based on polls, he could go much worse than that. So I think what's interesting tonight, though, is, Andrew Yang's getting out. I mean, if Warren and Biden stay in, we've never seen this historically, that people who perform this poorly in the first two contests just say, on to the next one.
We've never had is it true that we've never had an Iowa after which no one got out? I mean, getting Iowa was a little incoherent in terms of what the response was, and so maybe that was why. But nobody dropped out between Iowa and New Hampshire, which is crazy enough. Now we've got Andrew Yang dropping out basically at the bell on the night of New Hampshire. That's consequential in terms of the overall field, right? I mean, he's the non-white candidate in the field, and he's now out. And so in terms of the Democrats contending with diversity issues, this is a real thing.
Steve Kornacki, as heads hang among members of the Yang gang, he's getting out tonight, suspending his campaign. You have another round of new numbers.
Yeah, we've got some of these cities now. We're getting more vote in. It's adjusting, the statewide number there. It's 3,001 now. That's the lead for Sanders over Buttigieg. 1/5 of the state now reporting what just came in. We jumped to 80% reporting in Portsmouth. Again, liberal city there right near the main line, right at the main line. Bernie Sanders leading this thing by 4 over Buttigieg and Klobuchar with most of that city in right now. How about this? We said Manchester. Remember, there was 58% in the last time we looked, and Sanders was up 13. Check it out now with 67% in 2/3 of the biggest city in New Hampshire. Sanders has expanded that lead to 14 points. So we will see in the remaining wards if that shrinks. But that right now, honestly, you're looking at this entire state. That right now, if it were to hold like that, that's the best news on this map, besides the fact that he's leading statewide. That's the best single thing I've seen for Sanders on here. Also, again, look at right next door, Bedford, suburb, upscale, a suburb of Manchester here, 100% in. Klobuchar, Buttigieg, more than half the vote between them, very closely divided, a narrow win for Klobuchar, Sanders back at 16%. I'm going to be repeating this a lot tonight. I have a feeling demographically, this was very favorable to the non-Sanders. They got almost a perfect divide between the two of them of that vote. And in other words, neither one of them was able to build a massive lead over Sanders here and really make a dent in that statewide lead. Again, 3,000 there for Bernie Sanders statewide. Let's see Nashua. Let's see Hudson. Let's see the Massachusetts-New Hampshire line. But that is good news if you're Bernie Sanders for now.
And we add this because our viewers have seen this graphic at the bottom of the screen. We have determined that the closing order will include Sanders, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar. To show our homework here, I've just seen 1 gallon of highlighter fluid expended on the articles we are all reading.
Yeah.
Some terrific journalism, including but not limited to the work of our own Carol Lee. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back and talk about DOJ and what this day meant to the rule of law.
So you want to be president? I've watched many candidates run for their party's nomination, but only a few knew how to get it.
I am paying for this microphone.
My podcast is about what it takes to get the nomination. 6 episodes, 6 timeless themes that separate the few winners from the many losers.
The hope still lives, and the dream shall never die.
So You Want to Be President with Chris Matthews, an MSNBC podcast. Search now wherever you're listening and subscribe. Episode 4 available now.
So you want to be president? I've watched many candidates run for their party's nomination, but only a few knew how to get it.
I feel your pain.
My podcast is about what it takes to get the nomination. 6 episodes, 6 timeless themes that separate the few winners from the many losers.
This campaign was and will remain the great honor of my life.
So You Want to Be President with Chris Matthews, an MSNBC podcast. Search now wherever you're listening and subscribe. Episode 4 available now.
Polls have been closed in New Hampshire for coming up on 21 minutes. There are your top 3. NBC News is predicting that the closing order will include these 3 candidates. No projections or predictions from this news organization. Upper right-hand side of your screen, too early to call with 20% of the vote in.
And of course, since we have been covering this over the course of the last hour or so, there have been 2 major news stories that have broken. One is that Andrew Yang has suspended his campaign for the presidency. Nobody dropped out of the Democratic field after Iowa. We now do have someone dropping out as the polls close in New Hampshire. But the other breaking news story that has happened just in the past few minutes is news broken by NBC News, where the headline is this: Barr, meaning Attorney General William Barr, takes control of legal matters of interest to Trump, including Stone sentencing. This has just been published at NBCnews.com by Carol Lee Kendallanian and Peter Alexander. And the bottom line of this new reporting from NBC News is that, as suspected and feared by many people commenting on and observing today's developments, as 4 prosecutors quit rather than apparently accede to the government's decision to backtrack on its sentencing recommendation for the president's friend, Roger Stone, as these 4 prosecutors, Michael Morando, Adam Jed, Aaron Zelinsky, and Jonathan Kravis, all quit today. NBC News reports that, in fact, as feared, those resignations come after Attorney General William Barr and other senior Justice Department officials intervened to try to make Roger Stone's sentence more lenient. NBC further reporting that Attorney General William Barr and other senior Justice Department officials have also intervened in the case of Michael Flynn. Now, the backstory here is that we have seen some strange and sort of unexplained doings in the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. over the past couple of weeks. The D.C. U.S. Attorney was a woman named Jessie Liu. We learned somewhat suddenly a couple of weeks ago that Liu was being replaced. Now, she was being put forth for another job within the Trump administration, a Treasury Department job, but she was being replaced in her office somewhat suddenly and somewhat out of the chain of command by a new acting U.S. Attorney who was coming directly from Attorney General William Barr's office. Well, since that has happened, all around that time, we have seen prosecutors working on the Michael Flynn case reverse an earlier recommendation that he should get prison time. Just in the past 24 hours, we have seen prosecutors recommend that Roger Stone get prison time. The president publicly criticized that. And then the Justice Department, in what is believed to be an unprecedented act, the Justice Department withdrawing that recommendation to the judge and these prosecutors quitting in response. It should also be noted that this U.S. Attorney's Office is the one that's been handling the case of former Deputy Director and former Acting Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe. When the president fired James Comey as FBI Director, Andrew McCabe stepped up and became the Acting Director of the FBI. He made a number of key decisions around the counterintelligence and criminal investigation of the president and his campaign, and the president has been gunning for him ever since. NBC has been reporting that the president has been calling for Andrew McCabe to be imprisoned. That case is still before this same U.S. Attorney's Office that has seen all of this turmoil.
Nicole Wallace.
So in my hour today at 4 o'clock, Donald Trump was speaking, and we didn't take it because he was saying the sorts of nonsense that he says all the time about the Justice Department. But I read the transcript, and there's something worth sort of reminding ourselves, because with Trump, there are always patterns, and the answers are always said out loud. They're never hidden. He's not smart enough to be sneaky about these things. He smeared the Mueller campaign anew.
Yep.
And if you look at all of this effort, it is to not to smear the Mueller campaign, it's to erase it. It's to forget it ever existed, because what did the Mueller prosecutors do? They investigated crimes. And I think Lisa Page actually broke some news in that interview with you when you asked about the counterintelligence investigation. She said that really wasn't pursued so much by Mueller. What Mueller did was look at crimes, and where there were crimes, he investigated them and sought to prosecute them. They are seeking, Donald Trump and William Barr, to erase all of the crimes that were prosecuted by Mueller's team. And there is no other way to say it. They are seeking to erase a chapter that Donald Trump was always embarrassed by, always felt exposed by, and that happened to reveal many of the people around him as felons.
Now, with the NBC News reporting, and the Washington Post shortly thereafter has confirmed and published similar reporting, with this confirmation that, in fact, Attorney General William Barr is intervening in these individual prosecutions of these people close to the president, as the president is talking about these things publicly and contesting these prosecutions. There's no subtlety here. This is all laid bare.
Back to the story that supplied our motif for this evening. Some breaking news at the board with Steve Kornacki. Steve, what do you have?
Okay, take a look here again. Statewide, with nearly a quarter of the vote now in, Sanders continuing that lead. It's about 3,114. That's his margin over Buttigieg, who's in second. Buttigieg now opening up a few-point advantage over Klobuchar. But take a look. I've only been focusing on these top three because they're the only ones who've been really in double digits. Warren sitting here at 9%. Joe Biden at 9%. You got Steyer, Gabbard sort of rounding out near the bottom there. Why I show you Warren and Biden is because if you remember a few minutes ago, I told you our decision desk had projected that they were confident that Bernie Sanders was going to meet the delegate threshold. Trying to get that loaded up here. I'm having trouble loading it up, so let me just tell you. Our decision desk, here it is. It's finally up now. Our decision desk is confident that Bernie Sanders will hit the threshold, the 15% threshold, in both of New Hampshire's congressional districts and statewide, and that he will get at least 6 of the state's 24 pledged delegates. Our decision desk is also now confident that both Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden will not meet that 15% threshold in either congressional district or statewide, and as a result, that they will be shut out of pledged delegates in the state of New Hampshire tonight.
All right, Steve Kornacki, thank you. Andrea Mitchell, who is alongside Chris Matthews in our Manchester bureau, has fresh reporting on something, Andrea, you and I talked about in the 11 o'clock hour last night, which was kind of a sad plot line to all those in the circle of Joe Biden and involved in the campaign.
Indeed, and people inside the Biden campaign are trying to be as optimistic as they can, talking about South Carolina, where, you know, he went tonight, leaving precipitously, very quickly from New Hampshire. But now they saw the handwriting here that he was not going to get a single delegate out of New Hampshire, as we've just been reporting from our decision desk. It's remarkably grim also for Elizabeth Warren, and they're trying to say, well, it's even worse for her than it is for us because she is the neighbor from Massachusetts and she doesn't have a viable alternative. They can at least say they still have hopes of relying on that African-American vote in South Carolina, despite the shock just in the last 24 hours of seeing Mike Bloomberg get this big surge in African-American support in the Quinnipiac national poll to the disadvantage of Joe Biden. Exactly. Bloomberg going up 22 points and Biden going down by exactly the same amount. So they are obviously not happy with these results, but they still say that they have a narrative if they can squeak it out in South Carolina. If they cannot in South Carolina, they said, especially this one advisor I just spoke to, that's another story.
Is this about winning the nomination to run against President Trump, or is this about saving his pride?
Well, this is about becoming the nominee. And if you don't become the nominee, there is no pride for Joe Biden. For the former sitting vice president, 8-year vice president, who got into this race late and agonized over getting into it, perhaps too late, but did not show the kind of fire. And what we're also seeing is a lot of dissatisfaction with his performance on this job.
The thing that I have really been struck with, and it's bothered me personally because I've tried to get interviews with him, his campaign and he, the candidate, decided not to do a single Sunday television program. All the most important ways to reach millions of people, lead the news that week, and they chose not until this Sunday when they finally agreed to do one of the programs. Did they think that was a smart strategy?
I think that they sheltered him way too much. There's going to be a lot of after-action reporting on this, but the bottom line is Joe Biden did not do well here, and there's a lot of explaining to do.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you both, and this pertains to where you are. Manchester numbers just came in to Steve. Steve?
Yeah, we just got some numbers here. I'm checking Manchester to see if we've got... with this. I got to zoom in a little bit here. Let's try Manchester. We're sitting at 67% in Manchester. The one I want to show you that we just got most of the city in is right here. We talked about Dover. Right next door is Rochester. Again, you're talking about older, more blue-collar cities, places that I think once upon a time Joe Biden thought he'd do very well in. Bernie Sanders, with 83% in now in the city of Rochester, is leading this thing over Buttigieg. Klobuchar back at 19. And again, Biden sitting there at single digits. Warren in single digits. What that's done, what the big vote batch we just got from Rochester has done, it's allowed Sanders to expand that lead a little bit, ever so slightly statewide, up now to about 3,362. I think that adds up to. So again, Sanders continuing to lead. I've been teeing this up and I've been watching, and I'll bring him to you as soon as I can. Anything we get from this border, this densely populated New Hampshire-Massachusetts border, if there's a shot for Buttigieg to close that gap, if there's even a shot for Klobuchar to catch Buttigieg, these places right here, Nashua, places around there like Hudson, Pelham, Wyndham, Londonderry, those are going to be key. So we're waiting on those. We still haven't got any returns there. But again, Sanders right now, an advantage there of about 3,300 statewide, 5 points.
Okay, good time to announce that my family and I have launched a Go Fund Steve campaign. We're going to get some new technology post-World War II. They've made a lot of advances in these boards, and we think he deserves it.
It's a touch screen that does not like being touched.
Right.
So it's awkward. It's
Thank you.
It doesn't, it's awkward. And Steve's so nice.
So what have we learned in Steve Kornacki's bailiwick?
Well, I mean, obviously, I have learned humility at this time of the night for any contest that we're watching with live results. And so I feel like at this point, we should not project beyond the 27% of the vote that we've got in. But these are nights where expectations are everything, and your momentum is defined on a curve. And so if you came in expecting to win and you won, that's great. Then people start looking at how much you won by. But if you came in and people are expecting you to do fourth or fifth and you did second or third, well, that can be sometimes an even bigger story. I do think that one of the things that's been sort of underappreciated and underreported here is the cash burn rate for these candidates, and whether or not the actual just cash resources to continue is going to start to come into play, because we're heading not just toward Nevada and South Carolina, but about 5 minutes after South Carolina is Super Tuesday. And if you're not sitting on a mountain of money at that point, there just isn't the possibility of competing at the highest level.
I also wonder why Democrats aren't happier. It seems like, and I have to say this next to Brian for a week, the Pete Buttigieg win in Iowa seemed like a huge political story, that if you liked Bernie, you had someone in that lane, and if you liked someone else, you had someone really promising to do really well there. If you like Bernie, he seems to be in position to do really well tonight. If you want someone else, you've got two fresh faces in Klobuchar and Buttigieg. Why are Democrats happier?
Because Trump is so bad every day.
I feel that. That's how I feel. But you guys are freaking me out.
Also, because because lots of people don't think either of these people can win.
Is that it?
I mean, that's the issue. Brian mentioned earlier, you talked about the candidate. The key part of the candidate is at the end of the movie where the guy says, what do we do now after he won, right? I'm looking at Amy Klobuchar. Let's say she has a great night. She comes in third. She gets 23%. But what do I do now? I didn't think I was going to go this far. She doesn't have the money. She doesn't have the resources. She can't compete in Super Tuesday.
But to Rachel's point, it might be like a 2-week parade, right?
If she gets a tremendous amount of money, that's great. I also think this, and this is a key thing we'll look at with Bernie and how his success goes. You look at Andrew Yang dropping out. Andrew Yang had a very, very intense following. It never blew up, but he had an intense following. He had Dave Chappelle and Donald Glover who endorsed him. He had a whole lot of high-profile stuff. It'll be interesting to see if his supporters go to Bernie or if they just drop out of the system, right? Because his support was very Bernie-like, where it's like, Andrew Yang is the only reason I've got involved in this process. If those people just decide they don't want to show up anymore, that's a bad sign for Democrats overall. They need to be able to get the people who've been brought in to go to another candidate.
Go ahead.
No, just back to New Hampshire. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus appropriately on, wow, did Klobuchar's surge cost Mayor Pete? But you look at what's happening in Manchester, where you would have expected Biden to do better.
Yeah.
Warren fading, probably Bernie picked up a lot of those votes. So he also benefited from the fade from Biden and Sanders. So it's interesting. That dynamic is important to watch going forward because it may not play out like it did in New Hampshire elsewhere.
In our exit polls, 6 out of 10 voters said the most important thing was electability. But another number jumped out at me. 30% of the people that responded to our exit polls said that if the nominee is a woman, it would make it harder to beat Donald Trump.
Wow.
Now that is not good news.
That's not good news. It's not good news because of that perception.
Because of that perception.
Well, and Nicole, back to your question on panic. I mean, I think whoever comes out of this will look stronger than anyone look. But, there's a New Hampshire poll this week. I forget who did it. 2/3 of New Hampshire Democrats said they'd rather have the planet Earth be destroyed by a meteor than Donald Trump winning election. I mean, the panic and the paralysis is high.
We have news on two fronts. The campaign starts looking a bit like a nature special at this stage, and we had no defections after Iowa. Michael Bennet has just dropped out of this race. So the herd thins. He's announcing it to his supporters, which include James Carville right now. As tempted as we are to go into that room, Nashua just came in on Steve's map. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, we've really been building up Nashua in this area, so we got almost half of Nashua. Again, this is a city right across the Massachusetts line. Route 3 goes right through there, the Pheasant Lane Mall. Nashua, 44% in. And again, this is crucial for Bernie Sanders. If this holds when the rest of Nashua comes in, he's leading Pete Buttigieg here, 29-25. Klobuchar at 18. Second largest city in the state of New Hampshire. Bedroom, it's a city, also a bedroom community in some ways for Massachusetts. And you see here in 2016, the margin for Sanders in Nashua was only 9 points. He won 22 statewide. So there was some opportunity in Nashua, in big, densely populated Nashua, for his opponents potentially to overtake him, get an advantage. If this holds, though, and Sanders is able to win Nashua, that's going to be a very encouraging sign for him in terms of trying to hold on to that statewide lead, which now sits at, let's see here, he is now nearly 4,000 votes ahead statewide. That is 3,983 vote lead statewide for Bernie Sanders. It's 5 points. 1/3 of the vote is in. What you just saw in Nashua is a big part of it. I'm being told, if I'm hearing this correctly, all of Rochester, all of the city of Rochester is now in. Again, Bernie Sanders winning here in Rochester, a 5-point margin over Pete Buttigieg. That also seems to have boosted his statewide total. So those are encouraging signs for Sanders. We'll continue to see the rest of Manchester. I am just checking. We're 83% here. Okay, so this is one thing we were wondering in Manchester. We were at 67%. The last time we checked in, we've got one more batch that'll come in after this. The margin for Sanders has shrunk from 14 to 11. These late reporting wards in Manchester might be a little bit more from the sort of the outer part of Manchester, where it's a little bit more, again, sort of bedroom suburb, basically. 11% here, Sanders leading Buttigieg. Again, 10%, 11%, 9%. If Sanders is winning Manchester by that much, if he's able to win Nashua, we'll see what happens. Those are incredibly encouraging signs for his campaign to be able to hold on to that lead. So let's see what happens when more Nashua comes in. Again, waiting on those big towns right along the Massachusetts border. But yeah, Sanders up 5 right now.
And that's the big story thus far, the lead that we know of for Bernie Sanders. Another break for us. We're back after this.
Hey, it's MSNBC's Chris Hayes. This week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? I'll be talking with Jon Favreau about the way to beat Trump.
I feel like too much of the conversation around 2020 in politics is a conversation we're all having with ourselves. So I wanted to do focus groups of people Democrats probably need to win, not just the Obama-Trump voters, but non-voters, sporadic voters, Romney voters, Clinton voters. And then I thought, well, I would go to all the different regions that we need and also talk to the activists and organizers on the ground about how they're trying to persuade these voters.
That's this week on Why Is This Happening? Please search Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening now and subscribe.
We're still coming in from across the state, but right now it is clear that Senator Sanders and Mayor Buttigieg had strong nights. And I also want to congratulate my friend and colleague, Amy Klobuchar, for showing just how wrong the pundits can be when they count a woman out. Our campaign is best positioned to beat Donald Trump in November because we can unite our party.
The remarks tonight, partial remarks by Elizabeth Warren. Here's what we're looking at. NBC News is projecting that the final shakeout will include, in some order, Sanders, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar, but not Warren in the top three. Polls have been closed now for 42 minutes in the state of New Hampshire. I'm looking at Steve Kornacki. I'm looking at David Plouffe. David, if you ran the place, what would you say to the candidates remaining in this race tonight? What would you say to the party?
Well, my interest in is who can actually win the nomination.
Yep, there is that.
And so even Amy Klobuchar had a great night. It's quite possible this is the best night of the entire campaign for her, because she's got to now put together a national campaign overnight. I live in California now. My ballot came to my home yesterday. Like, people are voting in Super Tuesday states. They're organizing. Bloomberg's all over the airwaves. So I think I would just encourage us, and not just the party, just casual viewers of this process. What really matters is right now, coming out of tonight, you'd still rather be Bernie Sanders than anybody else.
But how is she running less of a national campaign than Pete Buttigiig?
Well, Buttigieg, my understanding is, has more staff there. He's shown more ability to raise money online. So I think we're going to be able to see, because spending is public, both digital and TV, who's spending in these states, who's reallocating their staff. Travel schedule gets super important right now because you can't be in all the Super Tuesday states. So where do you think you can go? And my view is not for momentum. None of these candidates, does it matter on Super Tuesday? I won 2 states. So what? Thanks for playing. You can't be the nominee. Where can you get the delegates to become the nominee? So,
but we are looking at the field changing, right? We've seen Andrew Yang and Michael Bennet both drop out tonight. That leaves Tulsi Gabbard and Tom Steyer still at that end of the field. But we've seen 2 people drop out. With Joe Biden doing what appears to be poorly tonight in New Hampshire, that may cause a reckoning around both his campaign and his donors. If nationally, Democratic donors and Democratic voters are looking at a field that has Bernie at the top and that has Buttigieg and Klobuchar and Warren there contending with him, isn't it possible that Buttigieg and Warren and Klobuchar start to see the dynamics around their own race and their own cash flow situation change, simply because people are looking at this race turning out a way they didn't expect?
They might. But Biden's, maybe he'll surprise us and he'll drop out tonight, but I think he's got 18 days to see if he can win South Carolina. Sadly for him, even if he does that, he also doesn't have, of all of the major candidates, has had the most trouble raising money online. So his operation in the Super Tuesday states is probably going to be the weakest of all. So I think that, Rachel, that's really an important question is somebody going to emerge out of this group with Bloomberg looming to be the person where most of the political support, the voting support, and the financial support goes? Or does it stay muddled? Again, we've never seen anything like this where people finish 4th or 5th in states and they just keep going on. And so what that means is for Super Tuesday, now maybe people get out after Nevada or South Carolina, but that's, I think, and the other question I just say is, does Sanders grow his vote? If he can go from 28 to 30 or 35 in California and Texas, he's going to be super hard to stop. And I think so that's dependent on his ability to grow. But also, if all the non-Sanders votes getting carved up 4 or 5 ways, he could actually win the nomination, getting 32% of the vote.
And do you see him as having a national caliber campaign? Obviously, he's got more money than most of his rivals who aren't billionaires. But do you see him as having a scalable campaign in terms of winning?
He's got passionate grassroots volunteers. They've done this before. They probably have as better sense of the delegate game as anybody else. He's raised not quite a historic amount of money, but close to that. This will help him. So, yeah, he's the one person you could see on Super Tuesday. Who do you think will be viable in most congressional districts? Right now, you'd say Bernie Sanders is the only one. Now, in the next 18 days, you may say maybe Mayor Pete is able to do that, or Klobuchar. But he's the one person you'd say he's coming out of Super Tuesday with delegates. The question is, how big is the delta, or will there be a delta between him and the rest of the field?
David Plouffe, who has been there and done that. Steve Kornacki at the board has new exit poll data on late breakers, late voters, late deciders, and new raw vote. Correct, Steve?
Yeah, and you're starting to see it. Look, statewide here, more than a third in, and now it's 4 points between Sanders and Buttigieg, and now it's 4 points between Buttigieg and Klobuchar. So Sanders continuing to lead, Buttigieg getting some separation above Klobuchar. A reason for that we can show you. Nashua, again, second biggest city right across the line there from Massachusetts. We're now up to 2/3 in, and you can see Sanders continuing to lead here. That's very good news for him. Buttigieg has moved within 3 points of Sanders, but he's also outpacing Klobuchar here by 7 points. So Buttigieg in places like Nashua getting an advantage. Also, we told you at the start of the night that sort of the sweet spot in this state for Bernie Sanders in 2016 was all along the Connecticut Connecticut River, all along the Vermont border, towns right around there. And notice, you see a lot of Sanders purple. There are a lot of places here that navy blue, that's the Buttigieg color on this map. He's making some incursions. A lot of these are small places, but he's making some incursions into what was staunch Sanders territory in 2016. So it's one of the reasons when you look statewide that Buttigieg has now been able to move into second place, 4 points ahead of Klobuchar. But I've been trying to get this in all night, and I keep forgetting to. Let me make sure I do it now because I think it tells a major story about why this happened tonight. It's our exit poll on the question. We showed you about half of the Democratic electorate said they decided in the final few days of this, and a lot of them said the debate was the reason. So take a look here. The last few days, how did they vote? Look at that. Again, half of the electorate said this is when they made up their mind. 28% of them went to Buttigieg. 23% of them went to Amy Klobuchar. Only 16 for Sanders, 8 for Warren, 12 for Biden. Half, this is a quarter of the New Hampshire Democratic electorate right here in the final couple days opted for Buttigieg or opted for Klobuchar. And again, we've been talking about this. When you see Klobuchar and Buttigieg within single digits of Bernie Sanders, if you're Klobuchar, you're saying, why couldn't I have had 10% more of that? And if you're Buttigieg, you're saying, why couldn't I have had 10% more of that? There's a big chunk of the electorate. They're really split between the two of them.
Incompetence in Iowa is one of the reasons. I'll go ahead and say it. Hey, let's check in on the Sanders campaign headquarters. Shaq Brewster is our man covering that campaign. Shaq, how's it feel there?
Well, you're starting to get the feeling that people here at least like what they're seeing so far. They just actually loaded the people behind that will be behind Senator Sanders. They loaded them on the riser behind me, and the room is starting to fill up. It was empty for a long time. More media here than supporters at one point. And what you're hearing from the campaign right now is not that much, but you're hearing a sense of feeling good. It's a cautious optimism. That's the same thing Senator Sanders told me earlier today, where he said, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. It's an election day, but I'm still feeling good about the overall picture. What we're seeing so far, and as I listen to Steve break down those results, and you hear the crowd cheering right now, there's some results coming in on some screens now. They cheer every time there's exit poll data, or they even count it down to the top of the hour with the close of the polls. But the point I wanted to make was when I was listening to Steve break down those numbers, it was very clear coming out of Iowa, there was a strategy by this campaign to shift from Vice President Biden towards Mayor Pete Buttigieg. They started launching attacks. Senator Sanders read headlines connecting Mayor Pete to the billionaire class. What ended up happening afterwards was you also had other candidates in the race. Vice President Biden with that video connecting Pete and mocking his record as mayor. Amy Klobuchar had that strong debate performance. You had many of these candidates softening that rise in momentum that Mayor Pete had, and that was a clear strategy that you saw coming from the Sanders campaign. Now, one thing to note is as we continue to watch these results come in, Senator Sanders in 2016, remember, this is a state that he won. He did well in. He won it by 22 points, about a 60% margin that he had here. Based on the results we're seeing, he's not going to replicate that tonight. He is doing better than Elizabeth Warren, who is also a neighboring state senator, but he's still walking out of New Hampshire not with the same bump and not the same percentage that he had in 2016. But this is a good night. It could be a very good night for him. And right now you're seeing his supporters and his team kind of exuding that confidence at this point. Guys?
Shaq, thank you. And Garrett Hake is over at Amy Klobuchar headquarters. Garrett.
Hey, Brian, it's a pretty celebratory mood here, too. Folks are starting to migrate over from the bar into the main room here, and they're happy with the results they're seeing. This is mathematical proof of something that Klobuchar's campaign has been saying that they have seen really for the last couple of days, this momentum, the Klobo charge, the Klobo-mentum, whatever you want to call it. Now they've got some data to back it up here. Even if this numbers stall out, they finish in third place. That's still a significant improvement from where they were in Iowa, and they are going to try to build on it. But that's the challenge for Klobuchar. She now has to build the plane in midair. The campaign only has about 30 staffers in Nevada. A lot of them moved over there from Iowa. They just went up with what'll end up being a 7-figure ad buy in Nevada as they try to get her introduced in the state, introduced in South Carolina. Her numbers have not been good up till this point with African-American voters, but we saw it again and again and again today at polling places. Folks coming out telling me they decided at the last minute, oftentimes in the booth, to pull the lever for Amy Klobuchar. A lot of them women, a lot of them highly educated women, which we're seeing reflected in the exit polls. All of those positive signs for her, but we'll find out, I think, fairly quickly here whether Klobuchar can turn this momentum into something real, or if she becomes like John Kasich, who, in an interesting historical footnote, stood in this same ballroom when he came in a surprise second place back in 2016. Does she become a Kasich-like candidate, or someone who can build on what is unquestionably a success for her campaign tonight if these numbers hold, and turn it into something real that continues down the line? And that I just don't think we're going to have answers to anytime soon.
Garrett Hake, thanks. Joe Biden is going to speak here shortly. The problem is he's going to do it in South Carolina. There's our own Mike Memoli. And Mike, as you know, you've been listening to the coverage. You got to look pretty far down the list of Dems to find Joe Biden, which in itself is still quite a shock.
Yeah, Brian, safe to say that when I woke up this morning in Manchester, New Hampshire, I didn't think I'd be ending this day in Columbia, South Carolina. But it's also safe to say that when Joe Biden got in this race 9.5 months ago, he didn't think he was going to be looking at back-to-back fourth-place finishes in Iowa and New Hampshire, potentially even worse, depending on how these numbers stack up. But that's the reality that the Biden campaign finds themselves in. They're trying to sort of downplay this no-worries mentality here. Anita Dunn telling our colleague Alex Seitz-Wald that for all the hyperventilating that we're going to see about where Biden stands at this point, this is what they always expected. The problem with that, of course, is that Joe Biden invested an awful lot of time in Iowa and New Hampshire. I just got the numbers from my colleague on the beat, Mariana Sotomayor. 21 trips to Iowa, 11 trips to New Hampshire, only 7 trips to Nevada, the next in the order, 8 trips here to South Carolina. If this is his firewall, he hasn't necessarily been maintaining it. Perhaps, as one top Democrat in the state said, there's an argument to be made that he's been taking the state for granted. So that's why, in anticipation of a potentially bad night in New Hampshire, they rushed down here, wanted to plant that seed. The number of strengths Biden brought into this race as sort of the leading, practical, accomplished, moderate in the race, the heir of the Obama legacy, the leading Democrat likely to beat Donald Trump, all of those have been chipped away with his weak performances here. The bedrock of his support otherwise has been African-American voters. He believes he still has a chance. The Biden campaign telling me tonight that as long as there's still a little bit of a muddled picture here with a 1, 2, 3 evenly matched at the top of the ticket, they believe they still have a path here as more diverse states begin to vote. The big question going forward, of course, is do they have the resources to compete? Earlier today, when Biden was visiting a polling place, I asked him about some of those ads we've seen on the airwaves from Mike Bloomberg that feature him and President Obama. Makes it look like almost they were working together in the White House. Biden actually, in a candid moment, as we expect from the former vice president, said, if I had the money, I would be putting those ads up too, Brian.
Mike Memoli in Columbia, South Carolina, where we're about to hear from the candidate in a state other than the one he's running in tonight. Rachel Maddow, as if to supply what you and I always talk about, the split screen days we often have to cover.
Yeah.
While the president of the United States is attacking a federal judge appointed to the bench for life, we have this as a backdrop, New Hampshire, as if to underscore the stakes that the likes of David Plouffe keep repeating to the party faithful.
That's right.
There is one way to accomplish this.
Since the polls have closed in New Hampshire, we have seen NBC News and then the Washington Post and then the New York Times, all front page stories about what is going on in Washington, which is, I think, the biggest rule of law day that we have had in the Trump administration. This is the kind of day, I mean, short of the president defying a court order, which I think is the clear constitutional crisis that I think a lot of people have been fearing and predicting from this president. This is the one step down from that, but right next to it, which is the president, as being reported by all these news organizations, through his attorney general, intervening in active criminal cases being overseen by career prosecutors to favor his political allies. And so that being reported out tonight, it being reported not as a scandal, but just the way Washington works now. Seeing these 4 prosecutors resign today, wondering if there will be additional Justice Department officials or line prosecutors who will step down because of this, wondering what accountability the Congress may try to impose by this. I mean, obviously, it creates stakes for the general election in November that are all the more stark. The Democrats have to go through their process in order to pick who they want to run for them. I don't know how this affects that contest. Obviously, Claire, what you were saying earlier about just the stakes being all about how bad Donald Trump is right now. I mean, this is a milestone day.
It is. And I just got a text from a former U.S. attorney who said, if my assistant U.S. attorney resigned because I overruled them on a decision, you could be damn sure I would be out explaining my reasons. Mm-hmm. The silence speaks volumes. So basically what this person is saying, who is in the Department of Justice as a U.S. attorney, the fact that no one is explaining why the guidelines were inappropriate tells you all you need to know. Because the reason they're doing it is slimy, sleazy, dirty, horrible politics.
And it's not undercover. I mean, it's not. So when you say the guidelines were covered, so the sentencing recommendation for Roger Stone was reasoned in print, in writing, in a public court filing, saying this is the reasons that this case falls in this spot within the federal sentencing guidelines.
Correct.
It's explicit. The decision to rescind that guidance to the judge and instead say, judge, do whatever you want, is something that is not being carried out with any sort of fig leaf, with any sort of cover. It's the attorney general intervening in cases for for cases that benefit the president and that matter to the president and with which he is and for which he is expressing his desires.
But if I could just button your point, I mean, I think the reason no one's explaining it is because we're in Act 2 of a 5-part play. I mean, close DOJ FBI watchers have said, Frank Figluzzi said on my show yesterday, watch for a Flynn pardon. And I mean, I think since we've been on the air, Trump's been tweeting about Manafort. The comments I referenced earlier trying to erase that the Mueller probe ever took place. I mean, I think that they haven't started explaining it because they want to explain the final production.
Quick break for us. Our coverage and our conversation continues at the top of the hour.
Hey guys, Willie Geist here. This week on the Sunday Sit Down podcast, I get together with Golden Globe-winning actor Ewan McGregor to talk about a prolific career that includes his latest role in the superhero film Birds of Prey. Get that conversation now for free wherever you download your podcasts.